Hey guys, welcome back to my channel Practical Learning Assets. So today I am back with another video for Class 11 Political Science on Chapter 1. So in today's video, the very first topic is the principle of deliberation. Deliberation means a very long and a careful decision-making process. So the principle of deliberation, that how our Constituent Assembly or how the members, they deliberated upon the ideas that how the Constitution should be made. The authority of the Constituent Assembly comes from the procedures it adopted to frame the Constitution and the values its members brought to their deliberations. Now the authority of the Constituent Assembly, it has come from the procedures that it has adopted to frame the Constitution and also the deliberations it has undertaken to draft the Constitution. Each member in the Constituent Assembly deliberated upon the Constitution with the interests of the whole nation in mind. In our Constituent Assembly, there were many people, there were many representatives. Some were from Muslim community or some from backward classes, but they all took the interests of the entire nation into the deliberation. It was not like that a person, if he or she belongs from a minority group or from Muslim community, then he or she will talk about the interests of that particular community only. No, they discussed, they deliberated for the entire nation, for the interests of the entire nation. And almost every issue that lies at the foundation of a modern state was discussed with great sophistication. Each and every point was sophistically deliberated, and only one provision of the Constitution was passed without virtually any debate. That was the introduction of universal suffrage or universal franchise, because the framers of our Constitution knew that this is a very basic thing and this is a very important thing that each and every citizen in a country should have. Then the Constitution drew its authority from the fact the members of the Assembly placed a great emphasis on discussion and reasoned argument. They did not simply advance their own interests, but gave principled reasons to other members for their positions. Now, every member in the Assembly played great emphasis on discussion and arguments just because they wanted our Constitution to be a document that is free and fair for everyone. And due to the deliberations and the discussions that were made during the making of our Constitution, our Constituent Assembly deserves to be memorialized as one of the most significant chapters in the history of Constitution making and equal in importance to the French and American revolutions. Now, after principle of deliberation, let us move to procedures. That what were the procedures that our Constituent Assembly took to draft the Constitution? Now, the Constituent Assembly had 8 major committees on different subjects. We had 8 major committees that were on different subjects, and usually Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel or B.R. Ambedkar chaired these committees. Mostly these committees were chaired by these members only: Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel or B.R. Ambedkar. These were not men who agreed with each other on many things. We need to keep this thing in our mind that these people whom we are talking about, these were not the men who always agreed with each other. They had conflicts with each other regarding how the Constitution should be made. Like Ambedkar had been a bitter critic of Congress and Gandhi, accusing them of not doing enough for the upliftment of scheduled castes. Ambedkar always felt that Congress and Mahatma Gandhi ji, they are not doing much for the upliftment of scheduled castes. That's why he was a bitter critic of both of them. Then Patel and Nehru, they disagreed on many issues. But after all these, they all worked together just because to draft the constitution. Then each committee usually drafted particular provisions of the constitution which were then subjected to debate by the entire assembly. First the committees were made, then the committees were chaired by some prominent leaders. Then after that, when a committee made or drafted some provisions, were taken to the assembly, and in the assembly they were deliberated and they were discussed and many arguments took place. And after all this long procedures, the provisions were drafted in the constitution. Every single argument, query or concern was responded to with great care and in writing. The assembly met for 166 days, spread over 2 years and 11 months, and its sessions were open to the press and public alike. The sessions that whenever the committee met, whenever our Constituent Assembly met, whatever discussions they were doing, whatever arguments took place, these all were open to the public and to the press. Then comes inheritance of the nationalist movement. Now, an assembly as diverse as the Constituent Assembly of India could not have functioned if there was no background consensus on the main principle the constitution should enshrine. Our India had a very large constituent assembly, and having a large number of people in an assembly was a very difficult task because each and every person was having his or her own points that how the constitution should be made. This was possible only because of the India's nationalist movement, because during the nationalist movement, every citizen was having a basic idea that our country should have and what our constitution should consist. Perhaps the best summary of the principles that the nationalist movement brought to the Constituent Assembly is the Objectives Resolution. The best summary that of the principles that a Constituent Assembly brought was Objectives Resolution. The resolution that defined the aims of the assembly, and it was moved in by Nehru in 1946. This resolution encapsulated the aspirations and values behind the constitution. Based on this resolution, our constitution gave institutional expression to fundamental commitments like equality, liberty, democracy, sovereignty, and a cosmopolitan identity. Our last topic of this chapter is institutional arrangements. The third factor ensuring effectiveness of a constitution is a balanced arrangement of the institutions of government. As we read earlier, the powers are divided between legislature, executive and judiciary, and they all are independent entities, but they keep a check on each other so that no one works in an unfair or unjust manner. The same way, powers are divided between states and the central government also. Now, while evolving the most balanced governmental arrangements, the makers of our constitution did not hesitate to learn from the experiments and experiences of other countries. Therefore, the framers of the constitution were not averse to borrowing from other constitutional traditions. The framers of our constitution, they borrowed a number of provisions from different countries so as to make our constitution effective. But this borrowing was not actually slavish imitation. Each provision of the constitution had to be defended on grounds that it was suited to Indian problems and aspirations. Every provision that was borrowed from other constitutions was discussed so that it suited to the Indian constitution. Then comes the provisions that have been adopted from the constitutions of different countries. First comes British Constitution. We adopted first past the post, parliamentary form of government, idea of the rule of law, institution of the speaker and his or her role, law-making procedure. Then Irish Constitution gave us directive principles of state policy. Then from French Constitution we borrowed principles of liberty, equality and fraternity. then Canadian Constitution, a quasi-federal form of government, and the ideas of residual powers. Then United States Constitution gave Charter of Fundamental Rights and power of judicial review and independence of the judiciary. So guys, this was all for today's video, and we have completed this chapter in our today's video. I'll be bringing the next video on questions and answers along with their explanation of this chapter only. So guys, if you find my video to be helpful, hit like the button and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Bye guys.